is here now. All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining our February 14th FAC meeting. This morning we have the team from IT, Greg Mortimer, our CTO, and Perry Movick. And Perry, I am remiss to not remember your exact title. IT has a bunch of crazy titles that I can't keep straight. And so I'm gonna go ahead and turn this over to that team. Greg, are you gonna share your screen to present, or would you like me to?
Yeah, if you're okay with me sharing it, I'd prefer that than work through okay, super.
That's way better. And so if you wanna, Greg, you wanna introduce yourself and Perry a little bit better than I just did to the FAC team, that would be great. They're here to talk about 2.5.4, which is on preventative maintenance for IT. We covered this for maintenance and operations already back in November, I think. And so now we're going to cover it from the IT perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn it over.
All right, that sounds great. And thank you for the introduction, Gina, and thank you all of you for joining the call today. You know what, I'll say that I live in Denver. My wife participates in DPS's District Accountability Committee, and I know it takes a lot of volunteer time and commitment to be a part of these committees, and it's also crucial for the work that we're doing as a district for folks like you in our community to have eyes on what we're doing. So thank you for taking the time to join and for your interest in this. And so, as Gina said, my name is Greg Mortimer, and then also we have Perry on the team today. If I can mention just a couple things about Perry, he's an extraordinarily capable IT leader. We're really fortunate to have him, and his team oversees the IT infrastructure for the district. So in other words, all three of our data centers, that's right, we actually have three, including, and then in addition to that, our network and our fiber network that connects all the schools together. Actually, Perry, before he became an employee of the district, also had done some work as a contractor to build out the dark fiber network that we have for the district, which is some pretty amazing work. And his team does really high quality work. And also I worry a little bit sometimes with them because if they're the one team where if they make a mistake, it can actually be, an honest mistake. It could be something that takes down the network and just cripples the district's operations for however much time that is down. And so his team does a lot of really high quality work, and the 2.5.4 and 0.6 monitoring report refer to the uptime and the work that his team is responsible for. So grateful to have him on the team for sure. And I'll go ahead and jump into this. I'm not 100% sure if folks have how much time you've maybe had to read through that 2.5 monitoring report. The first part that I want to mention here is that we 2.5.4 asset protection. And so we've identified these key systems that the goal for this for each year is that we would have 99% uptime. And Perry has some processes in place whenever we do have an outage. He captures to the minute the amount of downtime for these services. And it's also, as you can see on the slide here, it's worth mentioning that we're measuring availability during instructional hours. Which I believe is from 7 a.m. to 4:30, something like that. And so the maintenance work that we plan, where sometimes there'll be a bit of an outage, that takes place after hours. So like say, for instance, if you're wondering how we could have 100% availability for some of these systems, how could we ever take those systems down for maintenance? Well, that's taking place outside of business hours. So basically, we want to make sure we're doing our best for these key systems to have uptime as much as possible throughout each and every learning day. And so, I'll just mention on these, this is for the reporting period that ended June 30th of last year, 2023. And so we certainly have a lot more systems in the district than just these. These are some of the key ones that we've called out. Infinite Campus, our student information system, and then also the systems that we use for PeopleSoft, HR, and finance. Our internet availability, as you all know, technology has become a pretty integral part of the learning day. So students need access to different resources via the internet, our phone system, all these other areas. And by the way, even in our identity and access management system, in other words, the infrastructure that we have in place so that staff and students can log into our system, and also parents who are using, say, Infinite Campus. And so if that goes down, which by the way, it did for in early January of 2021, and when we were 100% remote at that time, we had some challenges after doing an upgrade. And when everybody came back to school after winter break, the first 2 hours of the day, nobody could log in. It ground us to a halt, right? So that's super important. If people can't log into the network, then they can't go about their business for the day. So the goal for all of those is 99% uptime. And as you can see, for all of those, we achieved it, including the average. I do, in the interest of full disclosure, need to let you know that for this current reporting period, which will end at the end of June of 2024, the numbers for some of these numbers will not be as high. We actually had in early September of this school year, we did have an unintended outage where for basically what it came down to, some equipment malfunctioned, and we had about I think it was around a 6 or 7 hour outage starting in the middle of the morning. And so that did have some disruption for the school day. Students were able to stay in school for the most part and complete the day. But for this next reporting period, we are hopeful, we're optimistic that we'll still be able to meet the 99% uptime for all of these systems, but it won't be 100% for any of those items that we've identified on this slide. And so I do want to mention a couple more things about what we do when we do have an outage. We do our best to avoid that, and Perry's team does a really good job to minimize that. I don't think there's an IT team anywhere that has 100% uptime all the time, not even people like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, those types of folks. But when we do have an outage, what we do is the team that supports the system, we have a process in place now where they write what we call an incident response document or an incident document where we collect a lot of information or as much information as we can about the outage, including an executive summary. And then ideally, if we're able to identify what the root cause is, we document what our resolution and mitigation and lessons learned are, especially if it's a more serious outage. And then we can take some corrective actions depending on what we learn from that outage. And so that information is collected every time that we have an outage, and then we review that once a week. The IT leadership team does until we are satisfied that we've been able to resolve that to the extent that we're able. I'll mention this just for full disclosure. Like when we had an outage with our network earlier this year, we were never able to completely identify the root cause. We got fairly close, but couldn't identify it. Sometimes that's the way that things go. But if we can identify root cause, then that allows us to implement some lessons learned. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to this next part, and this would be policy 2.5.6, part of the same monitoring report. And here, it speaks to the district's, and in this case, IT's responsibility to make sure that we protect intellectual property, information, files, etc. And so like any other 21st century organization, a large percentage of the files, intellectual property that we have is digital in form, and we have that saved somewhere. It could be on our network, it could be in cloud applications, etc. And so the goal every year is to not have any data loss or significant damage. And so we are fortunate. We're thankful, grateful to say that during this past reporting period, we were not aware of any sort of data loss or damage and so forth. And that does lead into kind of a broader kind of update that I would like to just take a bit of time to share with you all. And that is especially in these days, 21st century, it's quite likely that the most significant or the most common cause of loss of data would be for some sort of cybersecurity breach, right? And so especially during the pandemic, when K-12 districts all across the country had to rapidly move virtually 100% of instruction into operations online, during that same time, cyber criminals, and a large percentage of these in other countries, I mean, honestly, from Russia, China, and others, really increased their focus on trying to hack into K-12 districts. And the most common type of, or the most lucrative type of of cybersecurity attack would be something called ransomware, which I'm guessing at least some of you on this call are familiar with. And the goal would be that a bad actor would hack into a network and then spend some time looking around the network without being detected, and then taking some data and then encrypting the data that they've left behind, and then charging a ransom to a school district to say, if you want this data back, then you've got to pay a ransom for this. And so K-12 has become an increasingly large target in a very lucrative international ransomware business. And so you can see on that last bullet point on that slide, between 2016 and 2022, approximately, well, there's the number, just over 1,600 school districts, or almost 9% of all the school districts in the US, reported some type of cyber event. And by the way, one thing that we do know for sure, cybersecurity attacks tend to be underreported. Even though there are federal guidelines and state guidelines for the type of reporting that needs to be done, a lot of times this is underreported. And so Perry and I have talked a fair amount over the last couple of years about the threat of cybersecurity incidents now. Like say several years ago, pre-pandemic, that just felt like child's play compared to some of the pressure that we're under these days, right? And so just to give you a kind of an idea of the challenge of securing our network. So right now we have just over 56,000 managed devices. And by that we mean laptops and also some desktops for both students and staff. And then also one of the most common ways for people to hack into a network and do some damage is what are called email phishing attacks. And I'm going to guess that most or perhaps all of you are familiar with that term, where people email an organization and then it might have some malicious code. It might direct people to turn over their credentials and so forth. And so we have multiple systems for monitoring the incoming email. And so we have about 325,000 emails incoming and outgoing each day. And our systems block about 20% of those that they determine to be malicious, right? So they never even reach the inbox of folks that they're intended for. That doesn't mean we're able to block 100% of malicious email, but we're able to block a good portion of it. Also, another thing that's just kind of amazing is, on average, there's about 35 million cyber attacks per day on our network. And also, I think I can mention this, and with Perry, he's always reminding me to be careful about what we share, especially in a public forum. We don't want to create more exposure for the organization by sharing some information about our network. But if any of you are ever interested and want to stop by the IT area, it's pretty interesting. We have some monitors that show real time the number of attacks that are coming against our network and from where in the globe. It's really kind of amazing. And by the way, those attacks tend to increase on evenings and then also especially holiday weekends, when the suspicion is that people will be less attentive to their networks. And just to give you an idea, prior to Labor Day 2022, we received warnings or heads up from federal cybersecurity authorities that they suspected there would be an increased cyber attack on K-12 school districts for that Labor Day weekend. And sure enough, LA United, the third largest district in the country, became the victim of a ransomware attack, right? And so the threat is real, and it's something that Perry's team provides the infrastructure and then partners with our cybersecurity team to monitor, that type of activity. And so I also want to take this, whenever I have an opportunity to speak with people in our community, I just want to take this time to express our gratitude for the support that we've had from senior district leadership, from our superintendent, from the board and so forth, that over the last number of years supported some significant investments in our cybersecurity practices, both in terms of the technology that we're able to use, and in terms of our cybersecurity efforts, and then also in terms of the number of staff devoted to this. And it's certainly based on my conversations with peers in other districts. We've been given the support to invest more heavily in cybersecurity measures than preventative measures, I should say, than what is typical for a K-12 district. And that takes a serious commitment of funds to be able to do that, and especially in Colorado K-12 funding, which can be challenging, as you all know, on the FAC. we appreciate that effort and so forth. So I think that pretty much summarizes it. For 2.5.4 would be the amount of uptime. Our goal is 99%, and then 2.5.6, our goal is to not suffer any sort of damage to our intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera, and then a chance to talk a little bit more about what we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective to protect against that. And so what I think might be appropriate here, and Gina will redirect me if not, maybe I'll just stop sharing here.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah, okay.
Greg, just a question. As a finance person and, working with this committee, I think we focus more on the financial side, and a lot of this is a little bit more operational in nature. Just out of curiosity, from a, planning and incident response and governance perspective, is there a separate body that you guys work with at the board level, like when you go through response plans or disaster recovery or all that? Or is that, I'm just curious, I want to make sure as part of this committee, I'm doing what I'm supposed to as this conversation evolves. And if there's a separate body that covers all that, then the nature of the questions is going to be very different, right? So I think a lot of what the policy is here, I think we're more focused on, the spending of the money, and are there, areas that we're spending appropriately as opposed to, more the operational and process stuff.
Yeah, so Mike, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a good reminder for me too. I guess that what we're talking about. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I was talking over you. Can you say that again?
Separate organization or process for them. Just asking if this committee is kind of responsible for that level of governance, or if there's another body that is more responsible for all those kind of operational decisions.
Yeah. So that's a great question. When we have a chance, there's not like a specific organization or body of folks that there's the ones like, okay, these are the folks that we go to for to ensure that who are providing oversight specifically around some of these operational areas. Yeah, so that's not the case. The finance, whenever we have a chance, we do make sure that we are reporting up to the right folks, right? Like, say, for instance, just in terms of budget approval, a lot of the cybersecurity stuff that we have in place definitely it takes some serious finances. So that becomes part of the budget process, I guess, where we're getting buy-in for some of this, but we're not. Perry, are you aware of anyone that we're reporting to specifically around that at the district?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I would say there's not anyone that we're specifically reporting to, but we do work with this organization. It's called MSISAC, and they are part of Department of Homeland Security. And so we have a sensor in our data center where we ship them our data on a daily basis. They do monitoring for us on websites. They do things like knowledge base information shares with us. They send us alerts that they know something is coming. And it's an organization that's really specific for education, government, and healthcare that the Department of Homeland has spun up to assist us with.
Got it. No, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Courtney, I think you're muted, or we can't hear you.
Still can't hear you, yeah.
I have found that it could just be as simple as clicking on the up arrow on the mute button and choosing a different microphone. Happens to me every time I change platforms.
Okay, I think I got it.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say,
Gina, you should join IT.
All of our teams work pretty collaboratively. So while they might not be directly reporting to one body, I do know that, like, when it comes to some of the safety concerns, they will talk to our operations team and kind of work together in that space. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. But I know, especially from the board position, like, it was pretty shocking to me when I found out how many attacks we were facing every single day, and it made that financial ask make a little bit more sense. And so putting some kind of context around some of the budgeting numbers was really helpful. So
is there like sort of built into, I know, you're spending on physical assets most of the time, but like training, education for staff, for students, right? Because that's a big preventative measure usually in most organizations, right? Of how to prevent cyber attacks and phishing attempts and that kind of stuff. What does the district have in place for that?
It's a great question. And so for staff, that has been a growing emphasis of ours over the past couple of years. And so 2 years ago, we went to cabinet and got sign off for having a mandatory training for all staff for cybersecurity. It was about a 10 or 15-minute training to go through that. In addition, at the beginning of the year, for all new staff, are required to go through a training via our learning management system around cybersecurity best practices. And then also some of the other training that we've done has been less, I guess you could say, overt. So like, say, for instance, last year, we used a technology tool that we have with one of our vendors to send out email that was actually spam and asking folks to click on a link and essentially turn over credentials and so forth. And then if they did that, then they were redirected to another web page that said, hey, we tried to find the most polite way. We didn't want it to feel like a gotcha, but hey, you've clicked over here just for your awareness. There's emails like this all the time. And if this had been a real spam, it could have caused some challenges and so forth, and then directed them to some additional online training, right? And then also for the student level, there's various ways that different teachers we work with an organization or some group of staff called the Digital Literacy Partners, and most schools have these DLPs, and they partner with teachers in schools to around the whole topic of digital citizenship and best practices on how to behave online and cybersecurity practices, that type of thing. That's one of those areas where I always feel like we could do more. In fact, it feels that way in almost anything that we do in cybersecurity. But those are our efforts to date. Yeah.
Hey, Greg and Barry.
Oh,
I was
I'm
just going
sorry.
to say, if you guys ever figure out how to do that well, let me know. I've spent the last 6 out of 7 years working at cybersecurity firms. I currently work at a pen testing platform company, and we have a lot of ex-NSA and GCHQ people, and we are subjected to 2 hours of annual security awareness training. And every year, somebody still clicks on a malicious link. Every year, there's a phishing campaign that's successful. So you'd think if anyone out there would be like more aware of it, would be a pen testing company that's subjected to 2 hours of training every year. And we still have people click on links. So if you ever figure out how to get people to stop doing that, would you please let me know?
I would say if you figure it out, let us know too.
It's impossible. 2 hours every year they make me go through this training, and people still click on links.
And it's interesting. You mentioned we do regular pen tests of all of our external resources as well. And one thing I was going to mention for our email, all the users have a potential phishing button link. So if they get an email, they don't know if it's legitimate or not, they can click a button and it goes to our cybersecurity team for review. So that's just another resource that's available to staff.
And do you ever do any like physical sort of breach testing? So I know for our org, and we're a government entity, as we're trained, right, some of the higher risk is like a random person walking through and just, hitting like a thumb drive on someone's system and getting keystroke. I mean, I don't understand all the details because I'm not IT, but right, apparently they could drop some device on, your laptop or your desktop if people still have those, and get keystrokes and all that stuff. So do you do any sort of like physical breach protection or training or education or?
Yeah, so I would say we do where we can, like tabletop exercises to test for things like that. We actually, none of our computers will read thumb drives. So we've turned off that access. Because I know another big one over the last couple of years was just wireless access to network printers. So we turn that off too. So we try and stay as current with things as we can.
Mhm. Greg and Perry, I had the opportunity to tour the facility last year, and I just want to say it is phenomenal. If anyone has not had the opportunity, it's really neat to kind of see that monitor that shows all the different threats. And maybe you could speak to, does the district have cybersecurity insurance? And if they do, what's the deductible? What's the protocol to go ahead and pay that deductible? And what resources does that then get us access to? If you don't mind speaking to that for a minute.
Do you want to take that one, Perry, or?
Sure, I can start. I'll first apologize for, I don't know the deductible amount off the top of my head, but we do have cybersecurity insurance. And of course, it's something that has, dramatically increased over the past few years, just based on ransomware attacks. I will say one of the things that we're really proud of here is just based on the things we're doing internally, we were actually given a rate reduction in our last cyber insurance policy.
That's great.
And if I can mention briefly, just yesterday, I read an article about there's a couple startups in the cybersecurity space who, if you agree to more thorough vetting by these cybersecurity insurance companies, they'll lower your rates even further. And so that's something that we want to investigate in terms of lowering our rates and risk and so forth. Yeah, but it's a great question, Christina.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. Because I know just in the Denver area in the last couple of years, not necessarily K through 12 schools, but some of the universities and the liberal arts colleges have had cybersecurity attacks, and their deductibles have been so high that they were hesitant to pay them, or then they would have multiple attacks, but then they didn't have built into their budget to pay the deductible more than one time. And I just, it sounds like you guys are doing great. I just didn't know if that was something you ever discussed, is how, just how to keep those rates low. But it sounds like, allowing extra vetting is a great idea to help lower the rate. That sounds great.
Hey, Christina, I don't know exactly how it works in the SLED world, but in the commercial side, this, as Perry mentioned, the evolution in the last decade of cybersecurity insurance has been really interesting. At first, it was really cheap and nobody really knew how to charge for it. And then it got incredibly expensive. And I mean, candidly, on the commercial side these days, it's a joke. Like, they install 24-hour waiting periods before you can claim damages. The deductibles get really high, and the amount of coverage you get. I mean, if you have a breach and you have to buy monitoring for the number of students we have in this district, like, it won't come close to covering it. I mean, some of the amount of risk that companies now have, especially in the technology space, is essentially enterprise-ending catastrophic risk, right? It's unbelievable how much risk there is relative to how much insurance you can get. So, yeah, it's tough space. I think, look, the one thing I would say for probably Courtney's benefit, as well as, Greg and Perry, is to consider whether or not there should be a separate, committee of some kind that evaluates it's not so much the security process or protocol, but more along the side of, the incident response, disaster recovery, like just making sure at the board level, everyone's aware of, how that process works and what the response would be. Because I think the term these days is more cyber resilience and cybersecurity, right? Like, I think everything in the security world is like, I heard it described one time as, if security were soccer, the score would be like 340 to 310, right? Like, everyone's really good at offensive and really terrible at defensive. So the idea that you can prevent an incident is pretty difficult. And I think it's becoming more of a governance issue of like, what does the response look like, as opposed to, can you really prevent one? So, I don't know if that's become best practices yet on and in education, but something talking through the details of the security side and IT in general and disaster recovery and all that.
Mike, I think that I completely agree with you. And I think cyber resiliency is a better term. One of the things I was thankful for last year is at the end of the last school year, I think early June, we did get sign off to do a tabletop exercise with all of cabinet, and then also a few other kind of senior leaders throughout the district. And we walked through with them. It's like, okay, we're going to pretend like we have a cybersecurity incident happening. We walked through that step by step. And then it was incredible to see like the eyes come open from people outside of IT. It's like, oh, what do I do here? What do I do there, et cetera. So we've made we started down that path. One of the things that we haven't found the bandwidth to do is some additional follow-up around that, to do basically some business continuity planning with all of the departments out there. Gina, right after that pay rollout, all these types of things. So you're right. We've started down that path. We've got a lot more work to do to mature in that area. Yeah.
Yeah, to add on to that, while we don't have an official committee set up, I think we have the steps in place of who we've already identified. Should there be an incident, we've already started identifying those people that would be immediately pulled in. And so while we still have a lot of work to do, I was very impressed because I had just started with the district in April, and we did this tabletop exercise. I think, Greg, was it really June? That's all a blur to me now, but it was incredibly impressive to see the work and thought that had already gone into it, with a partnership between the IT team, the security team, risk management. They had done pre-work to set the stage for leadership in those scenarios. It was really pretty impressive. I came from a district where the CTO didn't believe in cyber insurance, and so wasn't willing to do some of the things that our district does and does so well. And I'm not like the arguments I had for 2 years, like, you guys, I oversee risk management, like, you guys, you don't understand. And it was a losing battle. So I'm incredibly grateful for the partnership with IT and how seriously every time I have to do multi-factor authentication updates on my laptop, I'm like, ugh! And then I'm like, no, this is good. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd also like to add in there that there is, we as board members hear from IT quite often. I feel like I see you guys a lot. But once we form a committee, it has to be very forward facing, and there's sunshine laws and very public. And so we would rather have them do those activities with the leadership team where it can be in private and we're not exposing all of our tactics and everything to the whole world through a YouTube video.
Yeah. And to support Courtney's point
Yeah,
earlier,
that makes a lot of sense.
I know that none of us want to be wasteful with funds, but I have been really impressed with Adams 12 with how proactive they are with cybersecurity and internet and technology use, rather than approaching it in kind of a reactionary way, Gina, which sounds like maybe your former employer did that. And so I appreciate that IT is willing to take the time to explain and ask and be responsible for finances, because I really think it's worth the investment for that proactive approach to technology.
I appreciate that, Christina. And from our perspective, we're just super grateful that folks like Gina and Chris Godowski and others are supportive of having those conversations. One of the challenges that our peers at other districts and organizations talk about is just trying to get some time at the senior leadership table to talk through cybersecurity issues or cyber resiliency issues and the work that the organizations need to be doing. So we're thankful for that, for sure. Yeah. Gina, I
want to applaud you guys for the work. It's challenging, and many of the CISOs that I talk with, I don't know how they ever sleep at night.
Every time I do a deep dive with CISOs,
there's so many attack vectors out there these days, and yeah. So congratulations, you guys sound like you're on top of it. I think I would just echo probably what Paul said. I mean, everything I've learned in this space is like, you can have all the best tech and all the best scanners, and as long as you've got multi-factor authentication turned on and you make people aware of social engineering, I mean, it seems like still today, like the most effective way that hackers get in is through social engineering, right? You can't stop people from clicking on links. So if you can just keep doing the awareness and the training, that's probably, as much as you can do. So it sounds like you guys are on top of it, and you get the support you need at the board and the cabinet level. So congratulations.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Yeah. we're doing our best. I would never say that we're completely on top of it. It feels very, anyway. Yeah. By the way, Gina and Carolina, have we gone over? I feel like I've been talking too much.
We actually have a ton of time because we had to rearrange some things on our schedule. So worked out well that we do have plenty of time today to dive in as deep as you guys want to go. That said, any additional questions for Greg or Perry?
Yeah, look, I would just say Greg or Perry, since I kind of live in this world, and you know, if there's any help you guys need, I probably have somebody that I know that might be willing to volunteer and do some, pro bono work with you guys in terms of just advice or counsel. If there's anything you ever want to do best practices on, I probably know somebody that can help you guys out. I'm not a lot of use to you there. I know the terminology and that's about it. I can't actually do anything. So, but I'd be happy to, make some calls if that's ever helpful to you.
Hey, we appreciate that offer. We might take you up on that. So
Really do. I will add, I had a chance to ping a couple of folks, and to answer an earlier question, the deductible on our cybersecurity insurance is $100,000.
thanks for that.
Right, and we actually had a presentation from Stuart where he spent a good bit of time. A couple people may not have, I don't remember the timing of when people joined to hear that. So anyway, if we look back at the notes for the risk monitoring report piece, that is highlighted in there. So thank you, Perry.
Do you remember what the coverage? Do you remember what the coverage is, Gina? I don't remember what the coverage limit was.
I can look it up, but I definitely do not remember on the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say one of the challenges that the industry has with cybersecurity insurance is if you report an event, you're immediately told to not discuss it. And so one of the things that's pretty frustrating is, to not be able to learn from other organizations who had an incident where they tell us they just can't reveal what happened because they've applied against their cyber insurance and they've been told that they can't share any of the details in order to get reimbursed. So that's something that we've talked with officials at both the state level and Department of Homeland Security, because it is an industry-wide thing, and we're missing an opportunity to learn from others as they have events.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you guys so very much. Looks like no more questions. So Greg, Perry, thank you for joining us. And Gavin, we can go ahead and stop recording and